Jivanam Kavibidiritam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Srimadatam Bhuvigananti Bhurida Janaha. Good evening, everyone. Today we have a class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and I thought I would read out to you M's second visit to Sri Ramakrishna. M, of course, was the author of the Sri Ramakrishna Kathamrita, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. And his second meeting with Sri Ramakrishna is really wonderful. So my plan is I'll read the passage out loud in English translation from Swami Nikhilanandaji's translation. It's a very good translation. There are just a couple places where I'll mention the original Bengali and maybe translate some phrases a little bit differently from him. So I'll first read out the whole passage, and then I'll come back and discuss some of the points and issues raised in the passage. So he doesn't give an exact date for the second visit, but it's sometime in March 1882. And the moment he walks into Sri Ramakrishna's room in Dukhineshwar, Sri Ramakrishna asks him a few questions. Where do you live? Where are you staying now? And then Sri Ramakrishna asks the following question, and I'll read it all the way through, starting with this question. Sri Ramakrishna asks M, "Are you married?" M, "Yes, sir." Sri Ramakrishna, with a shudder, "Oh, Ramlal, alas, he is married." Oh, Ramlal was the name of his nephew. The original Bangla is difficult to translate. Ore Ramlal, jah, biye kore feleche. It's a very funny Bangla expression. But the footnote that Nikhilanandaji supplies here for Ramlal is a nephew of Sri Ramakrishna and a priest in the Kali temple. But Sri Ramakrishna is a bit stunned that he's married and disappointed, basically. Then M says, he writes the following: "Like one guilty of a terrible offense, M sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the ground. He thought, is it such a wicked thing to get married?" And the master continued, "Have you any children?" M this time could hear the beating of his own heart. He whispered in a trembling voice, "Yes, sir, I have children." Very sadly, Sri Ramakrishna said, "Ah, me, he even has children." Again, the Bangla here is incomparable. মাস্টারে বুক ডিপ ডিপ করিতেছে, his heart is beating. ভয়ে ভয়ে বলিলেন, "আগে ছেলে হয়েছে।" ঠাকুর আবার আক্ষেপ করিয়া বলিতেছেন, "যা, ছেলে হয়ে গেছে।" Thus rebuked, M sat speechless. His pride had received a blow. So the beauty of this, one of the things that's so wonderful about this chapter is that I call it the ego-crushing chapter. And it explains in great detail how step by step Sri Ramakrishna is shattering the ego of this brilliant disciple. His pride had received a blow. After a few minutes, Sri Ramakrishna looked at him kindly and said affectionately, "You see, you have certain good signs. I know them by looking at a person's forehead, his eyes, and so on. Tell me now, what kind of person is your wife? Has she spiritual attributes, or is she under the power of avidya?" Here's one place where I respectfully beg to differ with Nikhilanandaji. I'll read the original Bangla first. "Acha, tomar poribar kemon? Vidya shakti na avidya shakti? Is your wife vidya shakti or avidya shakti?" That's the exact Bengali. Now, I would say that maybe a better translation would be something like, so we have to have a little bit of background in Sri Ramakrishna's understanding of the Divine Mother. He believed that Divine Mother manifests in all women. But Shakti can manifest either as avidya or as vidya. So I think it's from this standpoint that Sri Ramakrishna is asking him this question. All women, of course, are embodiments of Shakti, but is she the kind of manifestation of Shakti that will be a hindrance in your spiritual life? Or is she the kind of manifestation of Shakti that will help you in your spiritual life? Is she Vidya Shakti, the helper in spiritual life, or Avidya Shakti, the Shakti of ignorance, the person who will drag you down into worldliness? I think that's what Sri Ramakrishna meant by this question. M. She is all right, but I am afraid she is ignorant. Again, the Bangla here is important. I'll just mention it. So, Agya bhalo, kintu agyan, agyana. She's ignorant. She doesn't have jnana. Unlike him, right? So, master, with evident displeasure. And you are a man of knowledge? M had yet to learn the distinction between knowledge and ignorance. Up to this time, his conception had been that one got knowledge from books and schools. Later on, he gave up this false conception. He was taught that to know God is knowledge, and not to know God, ignorance. When Sri Ramakrishna exclaimed, "And you are a man of knowledge," M's ego was again badly shocked. Master, well, do you believe in God with form or without form? M, rather surprised, said to himself, so he's speaking to himself now, how can one believe in God without form when one believes in God with form? And if one believes in God without form, how can one believe that God has a form? Can these two contradictory ideas be true at the same time? Can a white liquid like milk be black? M. Sir, I like to think of God as formless. Master, very good. It is enough to have faith in either aspect. You believe in God without form. That is quite all right. But never for a moment think that this alone is true and all else false. Remember that God with form is just as true as God without form. But hold fast to your own conviction. The assertion that both are equally true amazed M. He had never learnt this from his books. Thus his ego received a third blow. But since it was not yet completely crushed, he came forward to argue with the master a little more. M. Sir, suppose one believes in God with form. Certainly he is not the clay image. Master, interrupting. But why clay? It is an image of spirit. Nikhilanji writes spirit with a capital S. Here again, I think the Bangla is significant. He says, Mati kenogo, chinmay pratima, chinmayi pratima. The pratima means the divine image. It's chinmayi. It's nothing but divine consciousness. So I think maybe better than spirit might be something like, it's an image of divine consciousness. The image itself is divine consciousness. M could not quite understand the significance of this image of divine consciousness. But sir, he said to the master, one should explain to those who worship the clay image that it is not God, and that, while worshiping it, they should have God in view and not the clay image. One should not worship clay. Master, sharply, that's the one hobby of you Calcutta people, giving lectures and bringing others to the light. Nobody ever stops to consider how to get the light himself. Who are you to teach others? He who is the Lord of the universe will teach everyone. He alone teaches us, who has created this universe, who has made the sun and moon, men and beasts, and all other beings, who has provided means for their sustenance, who has given children parents and endowed them with love to bring them up. The Lord has done so many things. Will he not show people the way to worship him? Here again, sorry for the interruptions, but Nikhilanji tends to translate God as he. I prefer she, because usually Sri Ramakrishna understands God as the Divine Mother. So I'll just change he to she usually. The Lord has done so many things. Will she not show people the way to worship her? If they need teaching, then she will be the teacher. She is our inner guide, antaryami. Suppose there is an error in worshiping the clay image. Doesn't God know that through it, she alone is being invoked? She will be pleased with that very worship. Why should you get a headache over it? You had better try for knowledge and devotion yourself. This time, M felt that his ego was completely crushed. He now said to himself, yes, he has spoken the truth. What need is there for me to teach others? Have I known God? Do I really love him? I haven't, this is a quotation, this is an expression in Bangla, I haven't room enough for myself in my bed, and I am inviting my friend to share it with me. And then what he means, I know nothing about God, yet I'm trying to teach others. What a shame. How foolish I am. This is not mathematics or history or literature that one can teach it to others. No, this is the deep mystery of God. What he says appeals to me. This was M's first argument with the Master, and happily his last. Master, you were talking of worshipping the clay image. Even if the image is made of clay, there is need for that sort of worship. God himself has provided different forms of worship. He who is the Lord of the universe has arranged all these forms to suit different men, different people, in different stages of knowledge. This is my last little quibble. God has arranged all these forms to suit different people in different stages of knowledge. Jar jogot tini eshab korechen odhikari bhede. Nana rokom puja ishwari ayojon korechen, jar jogot tini eshab korechen odhikari bhede. Adhikari bheda, actually. This is a kind of a technical term in Indian philosophical schools, which means that it's the doctrine of differing spiritual competencies. Different people are at different levels of spiritual fitness, and so different people are suited for different kinds of spiritual practice. So I would say something like, God has arranged all these forms to suit different people at different levels of spiritual fitness, something like that. Adhikari bheda. Then Sri Ramakrishna continues. The mother cooks different dishes to suit the stomachs of her different children. Suppose she has 5 children. If there is a fish to cook, she prepares various dishes from it, pulao, pickled fish, fried fish, and so on, to suit their different tastes and powers of digestion. Do you understand me? And I'll stop there because there's a lot here, and I want to go slowly through some of the important points in this passage. So, as you can tell, what I just read to you is a kind of progressive ego crushing. And M marks each time that his ego receives a blow. It's really wonderful, it's wonderfully dramatic. So let's go through each blow to the ego. Sri Ramakrishna begins by asking him, are you married? Seems like an innocent enough question. And when M says yes, Sri Ramakrishna is really disappointed, and gets kind of emotional about it. And M is really puzzled by this. And we might also be puzzled when we read this. The vast majority of people in the world are married. Most of the devotees of Sri Ramakrishna are not monks. There are only 1,500, 1,600 monks in the entire world, in our order, the Ramakrishna order. Most devotees of Sri Ramakrishna are married. What's wrong with marriage? There are so many householder devotees who would come to Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna loved them very much. He didn't look down on them. So why was Sri Ramakrishna so disappointed? This is the first question that might arise when you're reading this passage. This is my take on why Sri Ramakrishna was so disappointed. And then I can also, I'd like to hear from you as well after the class is over. I think the hint is that shortly after Sri Ramakrishna finds out that M also has children and he's also devastated by that, he's very sad, he says, you see, you have certain good signs. I know them by looking at a person's forehead, his eyes, and so on. I think that's an important piece of information, because I think the idea is, later on we find out, Sri Ramakrishna tells him, I had a vision in which I saw you in the group of Chaitanya. He was part of that, he was an attendant of an avatara. And he was in the inner circle of Sri Ramakrishna himself. Sri Ramakrishna knew that at the time, but he didn't reveal everything in the second visit. So he's addressing a highly spiritually evolved soul. That's the thing to keep in mind. A highly spiritually evolved soul. For a highly spiritually evolved soul, marriage is usually not the best path. This seems to be Sri Ramakrishna's standpoint. How do I know this? In fact, revered Swami Sumanasanaji just read this when he was discussing the life of Swami Sharananandaji. When Sharananandaji came to visit Sri Ramakrishna, more or less very early on in the relationship with his cousin, who later became Ramakrishnanandaji, he saw them, recognized that they were some of the disciples of Christ. And I think he had a copy of the Bible, and he said, you read out these passages, 2 passages. One passage from Jesus. Jesus says, oh, okay, I don't have the passage here, but basically what Maharaj read is that some people are eunuchs from birth, others are made eunuchs by others, presumably, and there's a third category of people who make themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. This is the idea. People who choose to remain celibate and pure for the sake of realizing God. And Sri Ramakrishna asks them to read from 1 Corinthians, which is a letter from St. Paul, a follower of Christ. This is from the New Testament. St. Paul says, now to the unmarried and the widows I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried as I am. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion. See, this is a good example of, we were just talking about adhikari bheda. Sri Ramakrishna talked about adhikari bheda. You have to be very honest with yourself and ask yourself, what kind of adhikari am I? Without deceiving yourself, without romanticizing spiritual life, but actually asking yourself, if you choose the wrong path, if you're not honest with yourself, it could lead to spiritual disaster. That's why it's so important to be brutally honest with yourself. Where do I really stand from a spiritual standpoint? And so Sri Ramakrishna saw immediately when he met M the second time that he was a highly spiritually evolved soul, that he would have been better off spiritually if he had not married, because he was capable of being a lifelong celibate. At the same time, we have to remember that all of the people that come to Sri Ramakrishna, visit him, whatever Sri Ramakrishna says to them, whatever he experiences, he gives to them, this is all part of Sri Ramakrishna's divine play. And so it's also extremely significant and important that M was a householder disciple. And it was given to M to record this wonderful, invaluable text we have, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. And it was as a householder that he inspired so many future monks to actually become monks, join the order. So from one standpoint, I think Sri Ramakrishna felt that he would have been better off if he had not married. From another standpoint, it's all part of his play, that M did marry, that he had children, because he set a very good example for other householders. Later, about a year and a half later, 15th December 1883, Sri Ramakrishna scolds M again, pretty severely. M turns to him in front of others. Just imagine this. He says, "Aren't you ashamed of yourself? You have children, and still you enjoy intercourse with your wife? Don't you hate yourself for thus leading a bestial life? Don't you hate yourself for dallying with a body which contains only blood, phlegm, filth, and excreta? One who contemplates the lotus feet of God looks on even the most beautiful woman as mere ash from the cremation ground. To enjoy a body which will not last and which consists of such impure ingredients as intestines, bile, flesh, and bone, aren't you ashamed of yourself?" M sat there silently, hanging his head in shame. Then the master continues, "A man who has tasted even a drop of God's ecstatic love looks on lust and greed as most insignificant. He or she who has tasted syrup made from sugar candy regards a drink made from treacle as a mere trifle. One gradually obtains that love for God if one but prays to her with a yearning heart and always chants her name and glories. So again, some people when they read this, especially in the West, they might say, well, I'm married, and what's the problem? But no, again, we have to remember, first of all, the first thing to keep in mind is he's a very highly evolved spiritual aspirant. But the second thing to keep in mind is the broader context of Hindu culture. According to Hinduism, even when you marry, marriage itself is a sacred rite. And if you consider yourself a true Hindu, a true spiritual aspirant, even in marriage, you will progressively try to make the marriage more and more spiritual. You'll try to spiritualize your relationship with your spouse. That's the ideal for every Hindu, whether householder or not. So now, it's in that context, I think, that Sri Ramakrishna is scolding M, because M has already had several children. M is also highly spiritually evolved. And even so, he continues to have a carnal relationship with his wife. That's why Sri Ramakrishna is scolding him. In fact, when other householder disciples would come to Sri Ramakrishna, and they would get frightened sometimes. They say, you're always talking about renunciation of lust and greed, and we're married. What about us? And then he says, it's okay. It's fine that you're married. But after having 1 or 2 children, try to live with your spouse like brother and sister. This is the essence of the Hindu stance on marriage. It's a sacred rite which can help you on the spiritual path, provided that you progressively try to spiritualize your relationship with your spouse. If you just get stuck at that first stage of romance and all that, you're not going to make spiritual progress. But try to spiritualize the marriage. This is why Sri Ramakrishna, I think, scolded M. Okay, so that was the first, Sri Ramakrishna's first scolding of M. Let's get to the second scolding. When Sri Ramakrishna asks him, okay, you have a wife. Is she avidya shakti or vidya shakti? Is she the shakti of knowledge or the shakti of ignorance? Is she the kind of shakti that's going to drag you down further into this world, or is she the kind of shakti that will help you in your spiritual life? You can both progress spiritually together. And M's problem is that he didn't understand the question. He's a highly educated person. At that time, he had at least 2 or maybe 3 master's degrees in different subjects. He's a brilliant man. He was a teacher himself. He was a professor in colleges. And so the moment he heard in Bengali, avidya shakti, vidya shakti, avidya and vidya, this just mean, he understood them to mean book learning, knowledge. So he knows that he's very learned from that standpoint. He's read so many things, he has so many academic degrees, and what has she studied? She hasn't studied anything. Who knows how far whether she even passed high school or whatever. So from that standpoint, he's saying, no, she's an agyani. She's very ignorant. Implying that he is not ignorant. He's highly educated, cultured, and he knows so many things. And then Sri Ramakrishna gives him a nice second scolding in the form of a question. Artumi gyani? And you're a gyani. You're calling your wife ignorant. Are you not ignorant? Or are you just as ignorant as she is? That's the interest. So this is the second blow that M received. He had always thought that from studying books, you can understand God and you can make spiritual progress. And now he's learning from Sri Ramakrishna that true knowledge is knowledge of God, and true ignorance is ignorance of God. And from that standpoint, he's no better off than his wife. Right? Third, ego bruising. The bruising comes before the crushing. So this is the ego bruising. Sri Ramakrishna asks him, Acha, tuma shakare bishas na nirakare? These terms, sakara and nirakara, these are technical terms in Sanskrit philosophy. Sri Ramakrishna frequently uses these terms. Sakara means with form, nirakara means without form. And this is not directly relevant here, but I think it's useful in going forward as we discuss the gospel in the future. Sri Ramakrishna also uses a different set of terms sometimes to refer to God. Nirguna and saguna. And they don't usually mean the same thing. So that's why I think it's important. Nirguna means without attributes. Saguna means with attributes. So when God is Saguna, he means the personal God who is omniscient, all-loving, who responds to our prayers. These are the what are called the omni attributes in philosophy of religion. Omniscience, omnipotence, all-loving. Nirguna means completely devoid of qualities. This corresponds to the non-dual pure consciousness of Advaita Vedanta. So that's one axis, Nirguna, Saguna. And then Nirakara, Sakara is another axis. God with form, God without form. And notice, so there are multiple permutations, there are 4 permutations. You can be Saguna, Sakara, with qualities and with form. You can also be Saguna, Nirakara, with qualities but without form. And in fact, this was the view of the Brahma Samaj, which was this 19th century Hindu reform movement to which M belonged, and to which many of Sri Ramakrishna's followers belonged. Narendra, the future Swami Vivekananda, used to attend Brahma Samaj meetings. Swami Brahmanandaji used to, and many others. So that was in the air at the time. That educated, cultured, rational Hindus don't believe in God with form because it's an irrational doctrine. That's something that villagers might believe, but not educated people, not smart people. We believe in the personal God, but without form. Saguna Nirakara. So this is the context, I think, that Sri Ramakrishna is asking this question because he met so many people from the Brahma Samaj, most famously Keshav Chandra Sen, but of course there were many others also. And it was fashionable at the time to be a follower of the Brahma Samaj. So Sri Ramakrishna asks him, do you believe in God with form or without form? And Master says, Obakhoye Shogoto. He's just completely stunned. Because he's read so many books, and one of those books, I believe, of course he doesn't say which book he's thinking of in this context, but he studied thoroughly Aristotle, this great Greek philosopher who came after Plato. And Aristotle developed what he called the law of non-contradiction. The idea is that if something has a property X, it cannot at the same time be not X. That's why M asks, if milk is white, then can it be black at the same time? If that were true, then it would violate the law of non-contradiction. So in the same way, M is thinking in terms of this Aristotelian logic, that if God does not have form, how can God have form at the same time? This is what he's having difficulty understanding, grasping, based on his training in Western logic, basically, and especially Aristotle. In a later meeting, Sri Ramakrishna will explain to him how it's logically possible for the formless God to also assume forms. He uses the beautiful analogy of an infinite ocean. He likens Satchitananda to an infinite ocean, and he says that under the cooling influence of bhakti, the ocean forms into ice. Different ice formations. Each ice formation corresponds to a different form of the personal God. Then Sri Ramakrishna goes on and says, but with the rising of the sun of knowledge, these ice forms melt. And then you might think that, well, then he's finally going for a kind of classical Advaitic position that from the highest standpoint, the formless God is true and God with form is untrue. But Sri Ramakrishna then further continues the story and he says, or the parable, the analogy, and he says, but in some places the ice does not melt at all. Nitya Shakar in Bengali. God also can assume eternal forms. It takes the form of quartz, sputigirakar, which never melts. Even with the rising of the sun of knowledge, it doesn't melt. So this is a beautiful example to explain to M how God can be both with form and without form at the same time, without violating the law of non-contradiction of Aristotle. Because the formless God can also choose to manifest to different spiritual aspirants in different forms, while in another aspect remaining formless. Now, we get to the last and in some ways the most interesting of the scoldings, where his ego gets finally completely crushed. Because M won't let it go. So he says, so in the beginning, of course, M says, I prefer God without form. And then Sri Ramakrishna says, to his surprise, but never forget that God also has form. And he's just so puzzled by this. Then he asks, Surely, though, those people who are worshipping clay images, we should educate them. We should tell them that they're doing something foolish. And we should tell them that they shouldn't worship God in the form of wood or stone or clay. And then Sri Ramakrishna gets really irritated with him. Birakta hoya in Bangla. And he really gives it to him. And this is really one of my favorite passages in the Gospel. I published a book a few years ago called Infinite Paths to Infinite Reality. It's a philosophical study of Sri Ramakrishna. And my main argument there is that Sri Ramakrishna was not only a mystic, a yogi, and an avatara, but a very sophisticated philosopher. And I'm pretty sure, before that, nobody had really considered him to be a philosopher in the traditional sense, but he had a deep philosophical intelligence. And I think his response to M's objection to idol worship, well, let's not call it idol worship, image worship, it's more neutral, is extremely philosophically subtle. He gives a three-pronged defense of image worship. It has three prongs. Let's go through them one by one. Look at how he proceeds. So Sri Ramakrishna's first line response, Mati keno go chinmoyi pratima. Why are you saying the image is made of clay or dirt? That image is nothing but a manifestation of divine consciousness. This is how he just begins his response, from the highest standpoint. What's that standpoint? It's a standpoint of Vijnana Vedanta. If you study the whole 1,200 pages of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, ideally in the original Bengali, Kathamrita, you'll find that on almost every page he's talking about Vijnana and the realization of the Vijnani that Shakti has become everything in this world. Brahman has become the 24 cosmic principles. In one place, he talks about one of his own ecstatic experiences of Vijnana when he's doing puja of the Divine Mother in Dakshineshwar. And he says, suddenly I saw that the puja vessels I was using were divine consciousness. The door sill was divine consciousness. A cat walked into the room. I saw the cat as divine consciousness. I saw myself as divine consciousness. This is Vijnana. It's in that context. So he's saying, wait a minute, but it's not true that the image is just dirt. Everything without exception is nothing but divine consciousness. And what's more, in another place, Sri Ramakrishna adds, but this divine consciousness manifests to varying degrees in different places and in different people. Different degrees of manifestation of Shakti. This is something he strongly believed in. This is also, you'll find in chapter 10 of the Bhagavad Gita, Vibhuti Yoga, that God manifests specially in certain forms. In the same way, Sri Ramakrishna's idea seems to be that if you have an image which is consecrated, in which you do the prana pratishtha, there's a Sanskrit term for invoking the divine in the image, where people for centuries come and worship this image as God and engage in intense austerities and spiritual practice. Shakti, divine consciousness, will manifest to a greater degree in that image than in ordinary, this table or something else. This is also divine consciousness. The table is divine consciousness. The laptop is divine consciousness, but to varying degrees. And in an image, a consecrated image that has been worshipped for a long time by sincere sadhakas and by realized souls, there's a greater manifestation of divine consciousness. So this is Sri Ramakrishna's first line response to M's objection to image worship. He says, you're wrong. The premise is wrong. The image is not actually made of clay. The image is actually a manifestation of divine consciousness. And so there's nothing wrong in people worshiping it because it's nothing but God. Because there's nothing apart from God. So how can you worship anything that's not God? But Sri Ramakrishna's genius is that he doesn't stop there. And like a good philosopher, you know what philosophers do? Their profession is to defend a certain philosophical position, and they immediately anticipate objections, and they say, but even if you assume this, then I'll still argue in this way. Even if you assume this, then I'll argue this way. So he starts to do that. So the second line response, before I get to the second line, let me pause here for a second. Regarding his first line response, which is this Vijnana standpoint, the image is actually divine consciousness. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the works of Swami Vivekananda and the life of Swami Vivekananda. Can anyone tell me how Swami Vivekananda famously defended image worship? The hint is that in Rajasthan, yeah. Very good, yes, the famous spitting on the picture incident. It's a beautiful incident. He's in Rajasthan as a wandering monk, 1891. And he goes to meet the Raja there, the king. And the king is also like M and like these, Brahma Samaj followers. He thought himself to be superior to the ordinary simpletons who worship God in images. And he says, Swamiji, all these people worship idols. I don't believe in idol worship. How can one worship stone, wood, and metal? I believe people are in illusion and just wasting time. And then Swamiji tells his assistant to take down a picture of the king and to spit on it. And the king thought at first maybe it was a joke, and then Swamiji becomes even more loudly, bring it down right now, spit on it. And then the king is completely stunned. He starts getting angry. And the attendant finally says, how can I spit on this? This picture is of our beloved and respected king. Then Swamiji goes in for the kill. He says, the king is sitting in front of you in person. This picture is merely a paper. It does not speak, hear, think, or move. But still, you did not spit because you see a shadow of your king in it. Spitting on it was like spitting on the king itself. The king looked at Swamiji and bowed down, clearly understanding what he was referring to. Swamiji then turned towards the king and said, though you are not present inside this portrait, your men feel that they will insult you if they spit on it. The same applies to people who worship idols made of wood, soil, or stone. The idol only reminds them of their God. They do not worship wood, soil, or stone. They worship their God through these idols. So now, one question to ask is Swami Vivekananda's defense of idol worship, image worship, more or less along the same lines as Sri Ramakrishna's? I think the answer is no. And not that they disagree, but remember, everything depends on whom they're talking to. And I think in this case, this king in Rajasthan was extremely skeptical, kind of an ultra-rationalist. So Swamiji thought to convince him, if he just told him what Sri Ramakrishna told M, no, the image is divine consciousness, the king will say, why should I prove it? I only see that it's made of stone or clay, right? Why did Sri Ramakrishna say that to M? Because he saw that he was a highly evolved soul. He was a great bhakta in a previous life. He was with Chaitanya during Chaitanya's incarnation. But notice there are many different ways of defending image worship. Swami Vivekananda gives one for a kind of arch rationalist. And Sri Ramakrishna gives another one to M because he was a great bhakta. I would say that Sri Ramakrishna's position is more radical than Swamiji's, because Swamiji says the image is not God, but the image reminds the worshipper of God. Sri Ramakrishna says the image is God. And again, this is not that they're disagreeing with each other. That would be a crude way of thinking about it. But they're speaking to different adhikaris, basically, people of varying degrees of spiritual competence. So you can't teach everybody the same kind of teaching, right? It wouldn't work. They wouldn't receive it in the right spirit. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about this first line response. But then, like a good philosopher, Sri Ramakrishna doesn't stop there. And he says, and let me just read the Bangla before I go back to the English. So remember when I read the passage, he said, God is antaryami. Okay. So he says, even if there's a mistake in this worship of this image, doesn't God know that the person is calling on God through that image? So he says, Jodi bujabar darkar hoy tini bujaben, tini to antarjami. যদি ওই মাটির প্রতিমা পূজা করাতে কিছু ভুল হয়ে থাকে তিনি কি জানেন না তাঁকেই ডাকা হচ্ছে তিনি ওই পূজাতেই সন্তুষ্ট হন তিনি ওই পূজাতেই সন্তুষ্ট হন This is very significant, I think. What Sri Ramakrishna says is God is omniscient and all-loving, and he knows that different people have different capacities and different preferences, and they like to think of God in different ways. God is infinite, so God can be thought about in many different ways. So doesn't God know that this person who's worshiping God in the image is worshiping God? And the sentence in Bangla, Tini oi pujatei santushto hon. God will be happy and satisfied with that worship of the image from that person. This reminds me of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, the famous verse 11. Ye yatha mam prapadyante tam tathaiva bhajamyaham. Swami Vivekananda also quoted this in his famous speech in Chicago at the World's Parliament of Religions. Ye yatha mam prapadyante tam sadhaiva bhajamyaham. However people approach me, says Bhagavan Krishna, I bless them in that way, however they approach me. They can think of me in the image, and I will bless them through that image. I think this is exactly what Sri Ramakrishna is saying. So this is Sri Ramakrishna's response. This is the second line response. Why do I call it the second line? His first line response is, you're wrong. The premise is wrong because the image is actually divine consciousness. It's not stone. Because you're ignorant of God, you see it as stone, but actually it's living divine consciousness. Second line response, as I said, like a good philosopher, even if there's some kind of mistake in the worship of the image, even then, there's nothing wrong with it because God himself or herself will manifest to the devotee in the form of the image. And Sri Ramakrishna doesn't end there. He has another kind of, he has a third line response in defending idol worship, image worship. He says, you were talking of worshiping the clay image. Then he says, even if the image is made of clay, so the first line response is not made of clay, it's divine consciousness. Even if I grant to you that the image is made of clay rather than divine consciousness, there's still need for that sort of worship. God herself has provided different forms of worship. She, who is the Lord of the universe, has arranged all these forms to suit different people in different levels of adhikara, different stages of spiritual competence. And then he gives this wonderful example of a mother cooking the same fish in 5 different ways for her 5 different children. And again, he's saying that since God is omniscient, God knows that this person he or she cannot think of God outside of the image. And so God is happy with that. And that person will make spiritual progress by doing that sincerely and faithfully. That seems to be the idea. And one other thing I wanted to bring your attention to in this third line response. Sri Ramakrishna mentions 2 things. One is adhikari bheda, which is different levels of spiritual competence. And then he adds another thing in the case of the fish example. So I'll read it in Bangla and then I'll. Ek maar panch chile, barite mach esheche. Ma mached nana rokom banjon korechen, ja ja pete shoy. The mother has cooked fish in different ways to suit different powers of digestion. Karo jonno mached polao, karo jonno mached ombol, mached chachuri, mach bhaja, ei shob korechen. For one with a hardier constitution, she'll make fish fry. For one with a weaker stomach, fish soup, and so on and so forth. Jeti jar bhalo lage. This is important. Jeti jar bhalo lage. In other places, Sri Ramakrishna will explain this as ruchi bhed, using the same illustration, the same analogy. It says ruchi bheda. Ruchi means taste, preference, temperament. It's what I like. And then he says, jeti jar pete shoy. Budle. And what people can digest, what people are capable of digesting. There you get something more like adhikari bheda. But the important thing here is that he's insisting on both those doctrines. One is difference in levels of spiritual fitness. The other is difference in temperament. And that's significant. The reason is, it gets a little bit philosophical, but in classical Advaita Vedanta, for instance, and in other schools of Vedanta, adhikari bheda plays a very important role in their fights with each other. And they're always talking in this language of higher and lower. We are the highest adhikaris, the people of highest spiritual competence. Therefore, the highest path is Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge, according to classical Advaitins. The Vaishnavas, the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, in the tradition of Achinta Bheda Veda Vedanta, they turn the tables on Shankara. And they say, yes, we accept your adhikari bheda. You guys are the lowest aspirants. You jnanis, you followers of the path of knowledge. Bhaktas are the highest aspirants. So bhakti is the highest path. You're exactly wrong. And you guys are actually the lowest and we're the highest. And so these games have been going on. So the thing about Sri Ramakrishna, the beauty of Sri Ramakrishna is that he doesn't play this game of higher and lower. He says it's a matter of preference. Just leave all your nonsense alone. Stop arguing with people. Try to realize God yourself. And just acknowledge that different people like to think of God in different ways, and that there's no higher and lower there. If I say I prefer, broccoli to radish, that doesn't mean that, somebody else who prefers radish to broccoli is superior to me, right? It's a matter of preference. So there's a lot of philosophical meaning and depth, even in the analogies that he uses. That's something I want to bring your attention to. We'll see that more and more as we move forward in the gospel. Okay, so I'll stop here because I'd love to hear questions from you, if you have any thoughts about any of these things. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Yes, so questions or comments? Yes. Oh, can you give a mic to Nishant?
Thank you. So the Shabdartha Sambandha that Swami Vivekananda is playing on, it's like an asa theory, right? It's like a shadow, he uses that word. So the image is a shadow. But Sri Ramakrishna gets rid of the Sambandha. The Shabda and the Artha are one and the same.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the move in the Mandukya where it says the Om is Brahman, right? So is this just a matter of mystical experience?
Elaborate the question.
So, insofar as I say the Om, that Shabda, the signifier, is the same as the Artha, the thing being signified, to be able to make that statement that Om is the same as that which it signifies, that's a matter of just mystical experience, right?
Yeah.
So, short of hearing the pranava, how would you rationally argue that there's no link between the Shabda and the Artha, that they're literally one and the same?
Yeah. No, I think you're right, but... but are you contrasting Swamiji with Thakur here?
I mean, because the contrast would be that Swamiji maintains a Sambandha. There is a difference Swamiji maintains.
No, so the only thing I'd say is, we shouldn't assume that Swami Vivekananda did not have the mystical experience.
Of course.
But as I said, what's important to keep in mind is the audience. I think that's an important part of this. And I don't think Swamiji felt that this Raja in Rajasthan was a fit recipient for the highest spiritual teaching. Which Alwar, Mangal Singh. That he was not the right, he would not be receptive to that kind of spiritual teaching. But I think you're right. The basic idea is right. That it's not just, Sri Ramakrishna would often say Nama and Namni are Abheda. The name itself is God. In the same way, the image is also God, right? The Omkar is also God.
Another thing is, what Swamiji understood about the reality, it is not there. Swamiji said, Raja, you know or not know, you believe or not believe, the quality and competence of your staff there, minister, he thinks it is insulting. Rather, they think they attach your presence there in the...
It turned off suddenly.
Oh, battery day.
Oh, no. I think it's on. Oh. Okay, but speak louder, Manas, please.
What I'm feeling, it is not the Swamiji's what is belief and faith and idea. Swami is saying, you see, your man thinks that you are present there. Although you are not. You are right from your point of view. It is neither Swamiji's, I believe in your point or your minister's point. It is not the question. Who is worshipping these devotees?
Bhav nashta korte nahi. Like let them.
Oh, I am speaking.
We say.
Because so many things you are quoting. Here I only one person who understands. Who is
And some online bingo.
Not some, many. Good. They have a clear understanding what Master said in original language Bengali. So what I am telling, we should not put Swamiji's idea is that Master's idea is the. It is the argumentation is going on. I have to refute my point. I have to establish something. Whether I am a devotee or not, I am now speaking, I am talking in favor of devotion. Actually, I am a Jnani. When I will debate on Jnana, at that time, it does not mean that I am really a follower of Jnanapatha, but that day I have to prove, because I have taken that part, that role I am playing. So Swamiji also is telling, you know or not know, you believe or not believe, your people who are doing this, they know. How can we? It can be an insult. Actually, physically, from physical point of view, you are not present there. But they are thinking, when devotees worship God, we do not see God formless. But at least we get joy. Say, yes, God is accepting our puja, our offering, and will respond to our prayers in this form. And there are so many forms also. I believe in this form. I believe in another form.
Yeah, I think that's
So
nice, Maharaj.
it
The
is
only thing I would add is that
what
yeah,
Swami
yeah.
Medhananda is telling here, it is not that he believes in that. He is explaining what Thakur wanted to say. It seems that.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd add is that the king also gets angry. That's also significant. It's not just for the followers. The king also gets angry when Swamiji says spit on the picture, which means he's also sort of directly poking the king.
Yes. He was amazed.
Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
what to answer because he said photo is not the man, but
Yeah.
now he cannot be.
Why is he getting angry? Exactly. That's also interesting because he's catching him at his own lie in a way. You yourself believe that this image has something significant in it. It's not just some colors on a piece of cardboard. There's something that's related to you that in it.
But Sri Ramakrishna or Shankara, they know that God is all permitting, is immanent, transcendent. But ordinary people who think in that way, what is wrong? What you are telling? Because
Right,
God
right.
is all-knowing.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you. Yeah. Anyone else have a question? Yeah, please.
In Advaita, we find the concept of Maya being anirvachaniya, or Maya cannot be said to be either as being or non-being. So how can we say that Advaita says that the world is ultimately non-existent?
This has nothing to do with the class, I think. So, are there questions that are more relevant to what we just talked about?
Is there something higher than moksha?
Wow, where are these? Are these are follow-up questions to my previous lectures? I don't know. Okay, are there questions that are related to today's class?
No, I mean there are questions, but
Okay, well let's give people here a chance to ask questions that are related to today's class. Any questions or insights that I missed or misunderstood? Can you give the mic to, what's your name?
My name is Guna. I'm visiting from Texas, actually.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting us. So you mentioned, right, that Swami was angry that this person got married.
Angry is not the right word. Disappointed.
Disappointed.
Disappointed. Yeah.
So you said that he knew his past and
Yeah.
also his future. So
Yeah.
that's why,
And his spiritual caliber.
and his spiritual caliber.
Yeah.
Keeping that aside, like you said, an ordinary person, right? So how would they know their caliber unless they go and see them?
A guru is indispensable. That's why Sri Ramakrishna would say, especially this is very common these days in the West, but also more frequently in India too. People do what's called spiritual shopping, and they go from one tradition to another, one ashrama to another. And at a certain point in your spiritual seeking, that's a good thing. You should be very broad-minded. You should expose yourself to many traditions, learn about different traditions. That's wonderful. But after a certain point, you have to commit. You have to go deep, dive deep. Sri Ramakrishna would use the example of shoveling. If you want to shovel for water deep down, and you shovel in one place, and then after 5 minutes, say, no, I'm tired, let me go to another place. And you go 10 feet away and you start digging there, you're never going to actually hit water. So depth is important. So I forgot, I lost the train of my thought.
So the question was, if we don't meet the master.
Oh, sorry, so this guru. So so finally you have to commit to a guru. That's the point of my that whole tangent, is that you should commit to one guru and one tradition and let your guru, the guru is the one who knows you better than yourself, than you know yourself. But still, I mean, you can also, but I think that, part of sadhana, part of spiritual practice is being brutally honest with yourself. And it's painful. It's not fun. This is not a pleasant part of spiritual life. We all like to think that much more highly of ourselves than we actually are, And we look down on others. We rate others lower than us, and we rate ourselves much higher than we actually are. This is the play of the ego. And an important part of spiritual life is catching the ego in the act. okay, but am I really that devotional? When I say God and God's will and thy will be done, do I really believe it in my heart of hearts? That's brutal honesty, you know. So that's important too.
So basically, so what you're saying is we need a guru to guide us, one, and then we also need to be
Honest with ourselves, brutally honest with ourselves, brutally honest. And not flatter ourselves and paint romantic images about ourselves and how great spiritual aspirants we are. But what are we really, and where do we stand? I think that's very important.
Just a gentle rejoinder.
Yes.
Sri Ramakrishna says, be honest and don't be hypocrite. If you really feel that you do not understand who can be your guru, you pray to God because you have a faith in God. There is a higher. With form or without form, that's different thing. You pray that also. I do not know what form you are actually. If you are formless, accept my prayers, accept my puja, worship. And if you are with form, show me which form. Because I do not know. I do not have jnana, I do not have bhakti, I do not have that knowledge, I do not have ability. I surrender at your feet. You decide what is good for me and reveal yourself. So, if you really think that I cannot understand who can be my guru, who is the real guru and who is a fake one, why don't you believe in God? Because God is all powerful. That is why you want to, with form or without form, you have confusion. But there is something higher power. Pray to him or her. He will send according to your need. God has done so many things. God will not do this if you are sincere. That is the point.
There are some questions that they are not completely related to that.
Okay, well, try me, and then we'll see whether
Okay, there is one person who really wants his question to be answered. Is it okay if I feel angry at my guru? Is it okay to express anger internally?
I don't know, it's a tricky question. Is it okay to feel anger at your guru? I'm not sure. Well, okay, that's one answer. you can give the mic to Maharaj.
You take your liberty. So long you are not choosing a guru, you take your liberty. Whether these or that, you select or not select. But once you have accepted somebody as your guru, you should follow 100% obedience, whatever spiritual instructions are coming from the guru. That is what the scriptures say. That is the tradition. That is what is going on. Today, because in every guru you will find that perhaps, according to you, that guru is not that capable. In one point of time, it may come. And you will change guru and guru, it is not that. Because God is seeing, God has appeared, your understanding of guru is not a right one. If you believe in God, God appears as your guru. Then how can you say guru is not ready or guru is, how can you show anger to your guru? Showing anger to your guru is mistrusting and showing anger to your God.
Right, so, yeah, I think that the only thing I'd add, I would agree, the only thing I'd add is that if you look at the example of Naren, the future Swami Vivekananda, and the way that he interacted with Sri Ramakrishna, he never got angry with Sri Ramakrishna. It's not anger, but he constantly questioned him. Constantly questioned him. So, so he's questioning the Guru is perfectly acceptable. Questioning the Guru is okay. You should not blindly accept everything that your Guru tells you just without asking, without thinking deeply. In one place, I think it's Ramchandra Datta, who sort of tells Swami Vivekananda, why don't you just accept what Sri Ramakrishna says? And Sri Ramakrishna scolds Ramchandra. He says, no, never say that. You should only accept what I say after thinking deeply about it and rationally, recognizing that it's the truth. So questioning the Guru is okay. You do it respectfully, but you can question. But getting angry, it's a bit of a different kind of a thing. That's why I would...
Tamasic bhakti, that you get angry at God and you impose God things. You can use anger as
Yeah.
sense or
Yeah, no, that's nice. Yeah, I mean, Sri Ramakrishna himself does say that there's a kind of tamasika form of devotion toward God, where you say, what? You're not going to show yourself to me, reveal yourself to me? This kind of pique. I think pique would be the right word in English. You can show pique to God. You can maybe even the word anger. I mean, that's interesting. We'd have to look at the original Bengali to see what he's actually saying. But that's a kind of spiritual anger, you see. Everything depends on the quality of the attitude. And I think the questioner is thinking more in terms of more of a kind of worldly kind of anger, in the way that you get angry at somebody for doing something bad to you. Can you feel that kind of anger? You can feel it, but I think what Maharaj is saying is, once you've already accepted the person as your guru, then it seems like it's you shouldn't have those kinds of ordinary emotions toward the guru. That's anyone else? Yeah.
Materialistic science needs our senses and intellect in order to interpret this material world. This approach is surely under the domain of human mind. Brahman, which is beyond everything, and its manifestation, this world of Maya, can any of it be ultimately deciphered by this pursuit of science, or is it only good enough to provide our daily amenities?
Daily amenities.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, okay, this is not directly related, but I can still try to answer it. So first of all, see, I think the questioner is asking the question from the standpoint of classical Advaita Vedanta, because this person is talking about Brahman, presumably in the sense of Nirguna Brahman, non-dual pure consciousness. Presumably he's thinking of Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, this world is unreal, like a dream. But I don't think this is Sri Ramakrishna's view. And I think he held, as Swami Turiyanji said at the end of his life, Brahma Satyam Jagat Satyam. The world also is a real manifestation of Shakti. Brahman is inseparable from Shakti. So that because Brahman and Shakti are inseparable, this world can also be, and is in fact, a real manifestation of Shakti. So relating it to what we were discussing today, it's from that context, not from the standpoint of classical Advaita. Sri Ramakrishna says, Chinmoy Pratima, that the image itself is divine consciousness. Because from the standpoint of classical Advaita, it doesn't make much sense. The names and forms are not consciousness. You subtract names and forms, and what's left is consciousness, divine consciousness, pure consciousness. But Sri Ramakrishna is saying the names and forms themselves are divine consciousness. Like the Chandogya Upanishad says, like how does Brahman relate to the world? When you fashion clay into differently shaped pots, when you shape gold into differently shaped forms of ornaments. This seems like real transformation. In exactly that way, Shakti actually becomes everything in this world. The names and forms are themselves real manifestations of divine consciousness. So why shouldn't the images also be?
What does Sri Ramakrishna meant when he said that God created all these, sun, moon, etc.? In other place, he said God alone has become all these.
Right.
Are they the same way expressing the same truth?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, so if you want me to get a little technical here, there are two kinds of causality that are frequently discussed in Indian philosophical schools, nimitta karana and upadana karana. Nimitta karana means the instrumental cause, and upadana karana is the material cause. And when Sri Ramakrishna is saying that God is he created the sun, the moon, the stars, he's thinking of God as the efficient cause, instrumental cause. They're synonyms, efficient cause and instrumental cause. And when he's saying God has become the 24 cosmic principles, he's thinking of God as the material cause of the world. And the important thing is that many Vedantic schools believe that God is both the material and the instrumental cause of this world. And Sri Ramakrishna certainly believed that. So the two are not incompatible, they're kind of complementary. He has created it out of himself? Right. And then entered into it, yeah. So it can be both. There's no real logical incompatibility there. Okay, great. Thank you. These are interesting questions. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.